Alla Mikhailovna, the mother-in-law, was the main person in Libasha and Oleg's family. It was her mother-in-law who insisted on buying a house in the village. The house came with 2 dilapidated sheds, a small garden, and an old well. The well had a heavy iron plate instead of a cover, the hinges of which had already rusted from time. Judging by the condition of the plate, it had not been opened for a long time. That's why Libasha was very surprised when she heard a human voice inside the well. True, at first the girl did not understand where the sound was coming from and did not insist on opening the well. Images are taken from freepik.com and pixabay.com. But when the eerie truth came to light, the girl regretted her gentleness. Alla Mikhailovna, can you hear it? As if someone is crying. Libasha straightened up and shook the earth off her hands. Her back ached from the work, and Libasha was glad to be able to straighten up. Libasha's husband, Oleg, had gone to buy groceries, leaving his mother and wife to master the village economy. In the early morning, Libasha and her mother-in-law went to work in the vegetable garden. Only Libasha was working alone, and her mother-in-law was sunbathing and commanding. "Don't talk nonsense." Mother-in-law turned over on the other side and stretched lazily. "On the plot only you and me, and do not be lazy. If you push on, you'll finish in an hour." Libasha obediently bent over the bed. They moved in the middle of summer and planted nothing on the plot of land and had no time. But her mother-in-law insisted on weeding all the weeds by hand. That way they wouldn't come up next year. Strange sounds like sobs or lamentations came from the side of the garden, where the well was hidden in the thicket. If Libasha had been alone, she would have looked long ago. But the mother-in-law could not be angry, it would be worse. Libasha has already learned that. "You're lucky that Oleshka took a shine to you." Alla Mikhailovna started an old song. "Otherwise, you'd be scrubbing the floors at school." Libasha bent down and furiously pulled a tuft of grass. As usual, she was silent. Her husband is always on her mother's side and blames Libasha for everything. He says she brought her mother down on her own. "You have no skin, no face," continued mother-in-law. "Well, at least I'll teach you some sense. You won't be rude, like this rude, ill-mannered boor." Rude mother-in-law called the neighbor 3 houses away, Larissa Guseva. Just yesterday, Larissa dared to shame Alla Mikhailovna that Libasha is pushing Libasha around, and she is lazy and inept. And she hinted at her excess weight, which it would be good to shake off with work. Alla Mikhailovna shouted at the whole village that Larissa would pay for her words. She'd regret it, but it would be too late. "Hello, housewives." A neighbor, Mark Semyonik, leaned over the fence. "Have you seen Guseva?" And something happened. Mother-in-law stood up and turned to the neighbor, half-turned, obviously posing. Mark Semyonik was a little older than her, imposing, with gray hair on his temples. And it didn't matter that he was married. How could his country wife compare to the elegant Alla Mikhailovna? The neighbor was embarrassed and didn't know where to keep his eyes. For some reason, his eyes kept returning to Alla Mikhailovna. He called her Alachka to himself. Images are taken from freepik.com, pixabay.com, and canva.com. "What about Larissa?" Libasha reminded me. "So it is, she disappeared," muttered the neighbor, devouring with his eyes the appetizing figure of Alachka. "How disappeared?" Libasha jumped up. "Well, Mark Semyonik almost fell over the fence. Her husband said she went to the toilet at night and didn't come back. He fell asleep, but what do you know? Maybe she had a tummy ache. Then he got up in the morning and Larissa was gone. No one had seen her." Alla Mikhailovna straightened up to her full height, squared her shoulders, and sauntered over to her neighbor. He blushed, turned pale, and noisily swallowed saliva at the sight of Alachka in a swimsuit. And what's so wrong with a mother-in-law, thought Libasha, an ordinary woman of age. Yes, she looks after herself, well-groomed. But there are a lot of such in the city, and men are not all sticky. And Alla Mikhailovna is followed by a herd, and obeyed in everything she does. If beforehand Libasha knew that Oleshka in everything with Mom agrees, then would not have married him. But Oleg seemed to be a normal guy, and Alla Mikhailovna, his character before the wedding, did not show. Well, and to hell with her, this Lariska Nahalka. Alla Mikhailovna took her neighbor's hand and trustingly looked into his eyes. And do you want your wife will also be lost? Mark Semyonik shuddered, but not at Alla Mikhailovna's suggestion, but at his own wife's call. Goodman, the mother-in-law, gave Mark Semyonik a predatory look and returned to the plate. If he were suddenly widowed, I'd marry him. Libasha snorted quietly but bit her tongue. She finished, finally, with the bed and ran into the house, not to say a barb to her mother-in-law. And it was time to prepare dinner for all three of them. It was Libasha's responsibility. Images were taken from freepic.com, pixabay.com, and canva.com. There was a lot to do, and Libasha forgot about the voice until she heard it again in the evening. The girl left the house and went to the garden. It was already dark, so she did not immediately realize what she saw. It seemed that there was a large light-colored stone on the well. Suddenly the stone moved, and Libasha saw that it was a person, a woman. In complete silence, the woman jumped off the well cover and ran doggedly into the bushes. Libasha clasped her hands to her chest and stood in a daze, not believing her eyes. First, the woman was completely naked, and secondly, it seemed to her that it was Alla Mikhailovna. The voice came again, much louder. Now Libasha was sure that someone was crying in the well. The sobs became clearer and quieter, the words impossible to make out, only sobs. Libasha tried to move the lid of the well, but it was not strong enough. Then the girl noticed that someone had greased the hinges of the lid, and they shone like new, as if the well had been opened recently. Libasha returned to the house and asked Oleg to help, but her husband laughed and said he would do it in the morning. How Libasha did not persuade, how no matter how much she asked, Oleg stubbornly said that he was tired and wanted to sleep. And the wife needs to learn to respect her husband and not waste his time and nerves to indulge his fantasies. Gritting her heart, Libasha went to bed. As soon as it dawned, Oleshka left again, and Alla Mikhailovna sent Libasha to the vegetable garden. Her mother-in-law and husband did not want to hear about the well, but only laughed at Libasha. Luckily for her, Mark Semyonik was already on duty at the fence. Luba, tell me, is Alokshka not coming out today? I mean, Alla Mikhailovna, the neighbor blushed thickly. I don't know, Mark Semyonik. But you go and fetch her yourself. Libasha resolutely opened the gate and invited the neighbor, and at the same time helped me lift the plate from the well. What do you need the well for? The neighbor's eyebrows went up. It's a cursed place. You shouldn't go there. Why is it cursed? A chill spread in Libasha's chest, and the girl felt the closeness of the mystery. They say people disappeared here 100 years ago. It's a wilderness. The authorities didn't care about them. And your house with the well stood in the middle of nowhere, abandoned. People never came here. Then gradually they started to develop the free land, built new streets, and came close to this house. But nobody wanted to live in that wreck. So what? Libasha began to get angry at the protracted beginning. Listen to me. Mark Semyonik put the girl off. 50 years ago, the son of the collective farm chairman disappeared. Then people remembered these old disappearances and complained to the authorities. It was in my memory. They sent the military, scoured the whole county, and found the missing men in your well. All they had left were skeletons. Even their clothes were decayed. Only one was identified by his ring. He was one of the missing men. What is it? A maniac? Libasha whispered with white lips. Who knows? The chairman's son later found himself. He's alive and well, and he disappeared. It's because he went to town with his friends. What happened to the skeletons? They took the skeletons for examination and closed the well. It's been there ever since. but our people don't go there. They say it's not a good place since so many people died in it. That's when Libasha told her neighbor that it was as if she heard a voice from the well. At first, Mark Semyonik didn't want to help, but Libasha lied that Alla Mikhailovna had asked him to, and the man couldn't resist. Well, if Alachta asked me to, then so be it. Mark Semyonik quacked and threw the lid off the well, and Lyubasha was stunned by the profanity. There was no water in the well, but Lariska Guseva was sitting there, and she winged everyone and everything, and her life and the well, and the one who had pushed her into the well. Mark Semyonik ran for a ladder, and Lariska climbed out into the light. The woman had been in the well for a little more than 24 hours, but she looked bad. She was gaunt and looked as if she had aged 10 years. Lariska did not recognize the man who had pushed her down. She said that the attacker came from behind when she bent over the open well. What Larissa was doing at night in someone else's garden, she refused to explain. But Lyubasha guessed it herself. She must have come to spy, to annoy Alla Mikhailovna. Mark Semyonich took the angry Larissa away, and Lyubasha stayed behind. The girl noticed that something glittered at the bottom of the well. She went down the ladder left behind and picked up a pendant in the form of 3 concentric circles, to which black feathers and tufts of wool were tied. The pendant was brand new, the metal rings gleaming. It was unlikely that the pendant had been lying in the well for years. It must have gotten there recently. It's most likely Larissa's or her attackers. Images were taken from freepik.com, pixabay.com, and canva.com. Larissa, to whom Lyubasha presented the pendant, did not identify the item, and Lyubasha took the pendant with her. And in the evening, tragedy played out in their home. Give it back. Alla Mikhailovna saw the pendant and imperiously extended her hand to it. So it's yours? Lyubasha hid the pendant behind her back and stepped back. It's mine. Where did you find it? In the well, where you pushed Larissa Guseva. Lyubasha threw an accusation in the face of her mother-in-law. I think the pendant fell off your neck when you leaned over the well. Alla Mikhailovna raised an eyebrow and stared unblinkingly at her sister-in-law. It's a pity. According to our rules, I can't take the pendant by force. The mother-in-law gritted her teeth. All right, tell me what you want for it. First, tell me the truth, burst out Lyubasha.